Chairman, members of states shed their skin. Traitors change their colors. The free citizens in democracies sometimes exercise the sacred constitutional right to alter or amend their political affiliations. Sometimes they do that after a short affiliation, maybe having signed up in the callousness of youth. Sometimes it takes 40 years and a lifetime of experience. But the 14th of the First Amendment vouchsafed to each of us the right to change our minds. The Ohio Revised Code contemplates the sort of mischief that that might create. Spilling internecine party politics onto the general ballot, affording somebody by trickery an advantage that they might not have had they stood for election in the primary. All of that is permissible. The state may take cognizance of those concerns and it may regulate at less than strict scrutiny to address them. That's the holding of Celebrezzi. That's the holding of Jolivet. That's the holding of Morrison. But in the text of the statute that requires a declaration of independence from a candidate is a recitation by the General Assembly that, having considered all of those factors, the medicine prescribed for that malady is that there must be a clearly articulated statement of disassociation from one's party, no later than 4 p.m. on the date before the primary. That is the fix. That is the box which needs to be checked, which to the satisfaction of the General Assembly remedies the problem. Tom Bernabei checked that box. The only question is whether or not he did it in good faith. Now, 2 things bear emphasis going forward. The first, because we were told today by Mr. Mack that we're going to make new law, which I suggest is not your prerogative, and at this late hour, not your burden. 2 things bear mind going forward. The first is that they bear the burden by clear and convincing evidence to show you that this man's disassociation was not in good faith. He says he's disassociated, and that's all he's required to do, to say it. At a certain place, in a certain way, on a certain date. He met all of those requirements. He said it. He is not required, and this is fully briefed, to do anything to prove his sincerity. He's not required to take any act. Rather, they bear the burden to demonstrate by acts, past and present, collectively taken, that he's done it in bad faith. So let's be clear about the landscape of what we've seen today. They have picked at the actions that he took. He disassociated himself from 3 Democratic clubs. They don't like the fact that he didn't put the letters in the mail in the Russian battle. He didn't do his part. He resigned as the treasurer of 3 Democratic campaigns. He resigned from his party position. He changed his own treasurer. He burnt his bridges. He consulted with counsel, found what was necessary, and acted upon the advice of counsel. Now, it may be, as has been suggested, that the advice of counsel was incomplete or wrong, but that's not the point. Because he's not required to take any affirmative actions in support of his Declaration of Independence. He's required to declare his independence and thereafter not act inconsistently with it. And they have demonstrated no subsequent inconsistent action. They may say that what he did after declaring wasn't enough to convince them, but that's not the standard. Subsequent acts go to show bad faith. They are not required to show good faith. It's in our brief, the Mahoning County case, dealing with the mayoralty race there, and there's absolutely no contrary law. That is black letter law from the Ohio Supreme Court. So don't be lulled into this notion of he didn't establish his bona fides. He issued his declaration, and that was enough. It falls to them to show his lack of bona fides. We point out, by the way, that in no case since opinion 2007-05, in no case since Morrison was decided, in no case has pre-declaration activity ever been found sufficient in and of itself to constitute an affirmative disproof, an affirmative proof of bad faith. Never once. Oh yes, Secretary Bruder has reserved, and the courts have subsequently held, that there may someday arise a fact pattern in which, based on pre-declaration activity alone, a candidate may be found to be in bad faith. But it ain't ever happened. And as we ask rhetorically then, and we ask rhetorically now, what would those pre-declaration statements have to look like? What would be so severe, so binding, that it would eradicate all future possibility of changing his mind, bind him to the Democratic Party for life? It would be as if we were here retrying the devil of Daniel Webster, and Satan were appearing from the sulphurous mist to claim the soul that this man had pledged for all eternity. Except the First Amendment doesn't let him make that bargain. He has the right to change his mind. He moved house. He moved to university. We are told that this was a temporary residence and that he was just passing through. I remind you the second prescription that the Ohio Supreme Court has articulated, which governs decisions here, is that the laws governing a candidate's access to the ballot are to be liberally construed to allow ballot access to provide the greatest possible choice for the voters. So when it comes time for a construction, when it comes time to ask, is this a case of no harm, no foul, let us consider that Mr. Bernabei wasn't some sort of a carpetbagger, a paid political circulator in Cincinnati from Irvine, California, living in a Red Roof Inn, in the only case that they can cite about temporariness of residency. He was a man who owned a house in Canton, who rented another house in Canton, belt and suspenders, to be sure that he had a residence in Canton when he declared for mayor of Canton. What's the trick? There's no trick. There's no artifice. There's no fraud. What is the place to which his habitation was fixed? Well, it turns out that for about 4 or 5 days at the beginning of May, it was University Avenue. But that's as it happened. He prepared for the eventuality that for as long as a month it might be University Avenue. He wrote a lease with a month-to-month renewal contract. He paid $1,000. He moved in his things. He was there for long or short. He was there until his tenants moved, because he didn't want to impose on them, because he's a decent man. Ultimately, how much time do I have? I have no sense of time. Ultimately, good faith asks that we... So, with respect to residency, I think it's fairly clear. For a number of days, which when he went to university, he did not know the number. He intended to return and did return there nightly as his place of residence until he had someplace else to go in the city of Canton, not in California. Good faith asks that you plumb the heart. Not one of the witnesses who were the protesters were called could come up with anything that suggests that this man disassociated himself from the Democratic Party of Africa. The best we had was the amateur psychoanalysis of Mr. Mack. That's nothing. Person after person after person, respected elected officials in this county, countywide office holders, have testified that this man's integrity is impeccable, and if he said it in good faith. They tell you a loyal, worthy person could never disassociate from their party. Abraham Lincoln became a Republican after a lifetime as a Whig. Winston Churchill famously crossed the aisle and became a conservative prime minister after having served years as an MP for Labor. Hillary Clinton's first term in politics was working for the Goldwater campaign. And Ronald Reagan said that the Democratic Party left him. He didn't leave the Democratic Party, which is maybe the place to end it. Tom Bernabei never signed a lifetime blood oath to the Democratic Party. He served it well, and this is how it thanks him. He's moved on. They have no choice but to let him go, and we implore you to grant him his freedom.